standards-based reform framework. So today for the webinar, we are going to focus on learning about the Equity Commission report and the supports-based and equity-based framework that it presents. And then we're going to talk about how your work fits in that growing national movement for equity. So I'm going to pass the baton off to David, and he's going to give you an overview of the Equity Commission and some of the issues it addressed. And then after he's done, we'll talk with Rich and Cynthia about the work that they've done in their states and the work that they've led and how they've united a bunch of these issues together. So David, why don't you take it away?
Okay. As a member of the Commission, one of the 26 members of the Commission, I had the privilege of serving on it. And so I've been asked today to set the stage for what Rich and Cynthia are going to talk about, which is how you all at the local level can use this report to assist in your state and local organizing efforts around educational equity. And so what I'm going to do is talk about the report, the main recommendations in the report, and then I'm going to hand it off to Rich and Cynthia to talk about how this report might be useful in your efforts in your states. So, Jocelyn, do you want to put up these slides that I've got? Do you have them? Okay. So, the Equity Commission, the shorthand for the Equity and Excellence Commission, was formed by Congress. It came out of an effort by Congressman Michael Honda from San Jose and Chaka Fattah from Philadelphia. They managed to get a little bit of money in a congressional act that to support the establishment of the commission, housing the commission in the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. So the Department of Education was responsible for hosting, sort of, if you will, the work of the commission through the Office of Civil Rights, and in particular, former Director Ruslan Ali. Secretary Duncan, through a process, a solicitation process, selected 27 members of the commission. It was supposed to be a smaller commission, but it got expanded to 27 members. In the report, the Equity and Excellence Commission report, you can see the names of the commissioners that did this work. It includes several of us from the states who've spent a long time working on school finance, particularly school finance equity. There were a number of representatives of national civil rights organizations, such as the NAACP, MALDEF, and others, and some of the more policy-oriented Beltway, inside the Washington Beltway groups, and it was co-chaired by Berkeley Law School Dean Chris Edley and Stanford Professor Mario Fiorentino. So the work began in 2011, and it took quite a bit of time to write this report and put it together. There was a lot of fits and starts, a lot of back and forth. It was a pretty difficult report to put together and get consensus on, but we did manage to get a final report in which there was unanimous consensus of all the members of the commission. And it's called For Each and Every Child, and it was issued in this past February. Okay? So the commission was charged with advising the federal government on looking at disparities in educational opportunity. What Jocelyn was talking about earlier, the fact that we had standards-based, the requirement for content and performance standards, assessments, but really standards-based reform as it was originally envisioned, which was to be not just standards, content standards and tests, but also the opportunity to learn or achieve those standards. That was always left out. So this commission, one way to think about it was to try to deal with the sort of what I will call missing leg in the three-legged stool, which is the resources and supports and elements, foundational elements that are needed to enable kids, all kids, particularly low-income children, English language learners, kids with disabilities and other special needs, and kids in high-poverty districts and schools, the resources that they need, money and resources that they need in order to achieve standards. So that's what the focus of the commission was, as established by Congress. It had a particular focus on school finance reform in the state level. Both Congressman Honda and Fattah were have long been concerned with the long-standing and persistent disparities in funding in our state school finance systems. So that was a particular focus. And I should mention that the last time the federal government actually formed a commission or had any official body examine state school finance, which, as you all know, is where all the money is. The money, essentially, in public education is controlled largely by the state. It's almost, you know, with the exception of a small percent, is controlled by the states through their financing formulas. The last time that the federal government actually looked at that was in the Nixon administration in 1972. It actually wrote a very good report calling for school finance reform in the states, which, as we all know today, went nowhere. So this was the first time that any kind of official federal body was charged with the task of looking at how the states were funding public education. Okay? So the report is divided into 5 sections. School finance reform. There's a section on teacher quality, if you will. Access to high-quality preschool. There's a section on addressing the needs of students in concentrated poverty. And there's a section on governance and accountability. I do want to also mention, though, there's a series of compendium reports that were written about various topics and signed on by various members of the commission. I would urge you to look at those. There's some very good short pieces that build on and explain and elucidate some of the main recommendations that are in the report. So those are important. So what I want to do today is talk about go through the core recommendations, particularly school finance reform and preschool. I'll mention the teacher quality and the supports for students in concentrated poverty. I'm not going to talk too much about the governance and accountability piece. If you read that, it's fine, but it's kind of boilerplate. So I think the real core recommendations that can be used here for organizing at the local and state level are the finance reform recommendations, the preschool recommendations, and I think as well the teacher quality and poverty issues can be helpful. But the main thing I want to focus in on is school finance reform and preschool. But as a background to that, I put up this slide about concentrated poverty in school districts in states across the country, and I just bring this to your attention because this report comes out in the context of growing, as you all know, growing concentrated student poverty within districts across and states across the country, and that makes the issue of equity, of building strong, equitable systems of public education in our states that much more compelling and pressing because the challenges are growing. As entire districts, not just schools, and even states become increasingly serve very high numbers of low-income students and English language learners and children with special needs, the challenges, the equity imperative in order to move the ball forward becomes even more important. So as you can see from this slide, we have states with, now we have states, some of our biggest states where there are significant concentrations of poor kids in the public education system, such as in Texas and California, throughout the South, and the like. So I want to talk a little bit about the school finance gaps, just to give you a little background kind of where we are. This is from our national report card on fair school funding, which some of you may have seen. We put out 2 editions of this. Another one's coming out in the fall, where we look at funding level and distribution of funding in the states. And as you can see, the range of funding, the disparities, we've always had really since, for many decades, and since the Rodriguez case in the early 70s, first challenged school funding, deep disparities in the state systems generally between low poverty, high wealth school districts and communities, and high poverty and low wealth school districts and communities. Although that's changed a lot, now we have whole states in which the funding levels are not very fair. So this chart shows you from 2009 the range of funding in the states. We have a low of $7,306. That's Tennessee, and a high of $19,520 in Wyoming. Many of our states are under $10,000 per pupil. And most of the important thing about those funding levels is there's literally no connection between the actual cost of delivering rigorous standards to all kids, including the additional costs to educate English language learners and the like, and the amount of money that's provided through the financing formula. Okay? And the other issue that we look at in the Fair Funding Report that's an important backdrop is the distribution of funding in states relative to student poverty. The F states are states that are regressive, meaning that if you're in a poor district, high poverty district, you get substantially less than if you're in a wealthy district. The grades C through up to if you're C or below to F, you're either regressive or flat. We have very few states that have anything that looks like fair school funding, meaning that the financing system actually provides more resources as poverty concentration in schools across the state increases. And this shows you the states that are progressive, flat, and regressive. As I said, very few. Some of the progressive states, though, are very low-spending states. So even if you're progressive, you have a little bit more money that goes to concentrated poverty. Your overall funding level may be very low. Go ahead, next. So this gives you a little bit of sense of it from the Mid-Atlantic region, just to give you an idea. You can look at these in the Fair Funding Report in your region. The one thing I want to point out about this slide is the difference between New York and New Jersey. Both are high spending states in terms of per pupil amount, but New York is very regressive, meaning that if you're in a small city or a rural district in New York or New York City, you get substantially less than your low poverty, high wealth districts, Long Island, Westchester County, and the like. New Jersey is just the opposite, one of the few states in the nation with high concentrations of poor kids in districts that actually provides more money for concentrated student poverty. Go ahead. Here are the states that get A's in funding distribution, meaning they actually give more as poverty concentration increases. But remember, the amounts that are provided in Ohio and Utah have no relationship to actually what it costs to deliver rigorous standards in a wide variety of content areas, a rich and rigorous curriculum to all students. So even though they're progressive, their funding levels are irrational or disconnected from what kids need. Next. And these are the worst funded states in the nation. Clearly, by far, Illinois leads the list. It has the distinction of having the most regressive school funding formula in the country, followed by North Carolina, North Dakota, New Hampshire, and Nevada. Nevada is particularly bad. The southern states generally are not regressive. They just don't spend anything. They're just flat, and they have no These are financing systems that, again, have no relationship to the cost of high-quality education. Next. This gives you a little bit of sense of that as well. So some of the fairness profiles, New York is regressive, Massachusetts progressives, Pennsylvania is a regressively funded state, as you're seeing playing out in Philadelphia these days. This is a long-standing problem in Pennsylvania that's coming home to roost. And you have states really that are pretty much kind of flat, that don't really do a lot. I put a couple up here: Wisconsin, California, and Arkansas. California has had a finance reform where they've changed things around, but I'm not sure that there's enough. We don't think there's enough new money in there to really change that trajectory very much, but we'll see. Next. So, with that backdrop, the recommendations of the Equity Commission on School Finance or Fair School Funding become particularly important, and I would say, as far as a federal report is concerned, relatively, I think these are path-breaking in the sense that we haven't had a federal commission, official commission, really take this kind of position before, and it builds on, as I said, kind of standards-based reform, but builds in the question of what do you need to deliver standards to all kids. So if you look at the report, it defines a meaningful educational opportunity in terms of what the states must do, which is to ensure that all students have the resources to achieve rigorous academic standards and obtain the skills for the economy and citizenship. The Commission recommends that the state has to identify and determine the cost of resources needed to provide all students with a meaningful educational opportunity. That's important, that identification of the cost, the actual cost. And then they have to adopt and implement finance systems that provide both equitable and sufficient funding to enable kids to achieve the standards, including the additional funds for the needs of students in poverty, ELL, and students with disabilities. The report recognizes that our financing systems have it all wrong. They have to provide more resources, carefully determined and calculated, to students who have particular needs, who are low income, ELL, students with disabilities, and in particular, extra funding for students that are attending school in high poverty settings. There have to be stable and predictable revenue streams, and something that's really important as well is the state financing systems must also ensure that local schools and districts effectively and efficiently use all their funds to achieve state standards. So these recommendations, I think, give you, from an organizing perspective in states, a new way of sort of talking about school finance, less in terms of equity and adequacy or dollar amounts, but rather, is the state financing system rationally connected, or is it logically connected, designed, put together, developed, so that the cost of delivering rigorous standards to all kids with diverse needs is identified, determined, and there is a formula that's built to provide that. There are recommendations on finance for the federal government that are important. We're really talking about a shift in federal policy away from what's being discussed in Washington today as we speak with the reauthorization of ESEA. Frankly, we need to move completely away from that to a federal policy that basically is about incentivizing and supporting the states to develop strong systems of public education, starting with fair school funding, systems that deliver fair school funding as we've recommended. So we want to see the federal government develop educational policies which direct and incentivize the states to develop and implement the financing systems that we talked about, a large new federal funding stream targeted to districts with high concentrated poverty. That's important in states that may lack the fiscal capacity to build a fair school funding formula, to provide incentives to reduce concentrated poverty, and using the civil rights laws to enforce state finance equity.
Hey, David, I think in the interest of time, do you want to maybe skip over the pre-K stuff and wrap up your segment, and we'll hand it over to Cynthia and Rich?
Yep.
Okay. Just so folks know, we will post this whole PowerPoint and a recording of the webinar online, so the pre-K information will definitely be in the slide deck that you can download. David, if you want to wrap up.
Oh, okay. So the rest of the recommendations, if you want to go to the end. So there's recommendations on substantially expanding access to pre-K, similar to what President Obama ordered. You can look at the recommendations on teacher quality and high poverty. Those are really about specific, when you look at teacher quality and the programs for students in poverty, are really about making sure that the funding, the financing formulas are directed towards critical foundational elements, such as effective teaching and good leadership and the like. The last point I'll make is that this report really charts a new vision for where we need to go, not new to you all, but in terms of federal policy, that we have to move away from the narrow test and governance-based reforms that Jocelyn talked about, that focus on schools, teachers, and students. It's a recognition, although it doesn't quite explicitly say that, it's a clear recognition that the current set of education and school-based reforms do not address the depth and breadth of resource and outcome disparities in our state public education systems. And lastly, it really charts, it makes equity, if you will, the central component and the path forward to building strong public education systems that can deliver rigorous, high-quality education for all students, including our nation's most disadvantaged students. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, David. If anyone has any questions, again, feel free to either tweet us or enter your questions in the chat box and send them to us. We'll take some questions at the end. For now, I'm going to turn it over to Rich Huddleston. Rich is from the Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. They've been a very active organization in Arkansas, and they've been some of the leading members of the Arkansas Opportunity to Learn campaign. So, Rich, why don't you take it away?
Well, thank you very much. And we'll talk about our campaign in a minute. Before I do that, I was asked to give just a little bit of information about how we got into this and also what the educational landscape in Arkansas looks like. Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, we've been around since 1977. I think we really got into this work through our work on efforts to expand access to quality pre-K for at-risk 3- and 4-year-olds. We're very active. Back in 2002, there was a state Supreme Court decision on called the Lakeview case that held Arkansas system to be unconstitutional. We tried to get pre-K mandated as part of that. We're unsuccessful, but we're able to convince the legislature to nonetheless put $100 million new dollars into pre-K annually. Since that time, we've done some limited K-12 education work in coalition with our grassroots partner, the Arkansas Public Policy Panel, since about 2008. The Arkansas Public Policy Panel, great organization that does just phenomenal grassroots organizing around education and other issues. They actually staff the Arkansas OTL campaign day to day, and does a great job of that. Our OTL campaign officially kicked off in 2010. I think what Arkansas Advocates brings to the Arkansas OTL Coalition is really our expertise in doing policy research, working with data. For example, we prepare fact sheets for our grassroots organizing partner on education indicators that they take into local communities for organizing purposes. Also some expertise in tax and budget issues, and do a lot of lobbying. So we have some pretty good relationships up at the Capitol, and can also bring some pretty good institutional relationships to the table. I think Arkansas has in most states. I think the landscape for education has become increasingly tougher. It all stems though from that 2002 school funding case. Really, the focus of that was to develop an adequate system of education rather than equitable, and so the focus has really been trying to do cost of living increases to a per student cost of providing an adequate education. So every legislative session, the main focus for the legislature is really trying to pass a 1.5 to 2% increase in funding for adequacy. Part of the problem is that not everything is considered part of adequacy. So, for example, our quality pre-K program is not considered part of adequacy, and so often gets left out of those annual funding increases. Pre-K has been flat funded since 2008, and of course over time, you either have to cut students or cut the quality of your program. We do have a legislature that's controlled by Republicans for the first time since Reconstruction, so that has really shaken things up. We have term limits, and so what that means is that increasingly we have a lack of institutional memory on school funding cases and around the need for things like pre-K for at-risk kids. Strong Tea Party influence in Arkansas, anti-tax, anti-government. We had some significant tax cuts during this past legislative session. I think increasingly our education influencers, especially from the business community, are very well funded, increasingly school choice. In terms of the major issues that our campaign has worked on, I think generally speaking, our focus has really been to try and shift the debate from this whole adequacy issue to really more about equity and making the opportunity, achievement gap really the focus of educational policy. It's been trying to change the nature of the debate away from choice, from standards and testing, again really to equity. I think also major focus has been trying to increase parental involvement and partnerships between parents, students, schools, and communities. In Arkansas, in many districts, that's really not encouraged, and so I know that's been a focus of the Arkansas Public Policy Panel in their grassroots organizing efforts. I think in terms of specific policy issues that we've worked on, expanding access to quality pre-K and after-school and summer programs, school discipline, passing an Arkansas DREAM Act, which we've not been successful in doing that. We've also had on our agenda improving teacher and administrator preparation and development and modernizing career and technical education, but we've not really done that much work on those last two issues just because the capacity of coalition members really hasn't lent itself to that. I think during this past session, increasingly for the first time, I had to play a lot of defense on school choice and education budget issues. I think in terms of how we've tried to tie those issues together into a campaign, really we do have a statewide coalition. I think it's critical to really have both state-level partners like us and also grassroots organizing partners. As a result of the panel's work, for example, they've been able to bring, I think, at least 9 or 10 strong grassroots groups in rural communities in Arkansas to the table. That's been a huge help. I think we've really tried to choose our issues based on two things. One, what the research says really works to close the gap for low-income and minority students, and also the capacity of our coalition partners. I think that's been very important. And of course, just really trying to make the focus on equity, opportunity, and supports for low-income students. I think the fact that we've really made that the focus of our campaign has really put it in the unique position of really being the only advocacy coalition out there for low-income students in Arkansas. Messaging, we've tried really hard to stick with the opportunity to learn frame. So using messages like the gap in quality educational opportunities for low-income students, greatest challenge facing Arkansas schools, how the gap has profound implications not only for our most disadvantaged students, but for the whole workforce and the whole state economy, and really trying to drum home the message that how well our low-income and minority students do in education really impacts economic development and job opportunities for the whole state, because you can not leave out an increasingly large segment of your population, and at some point down the line, years from now, Arkansas will likely be one of those states where minorities transition into the majority. But but also just really talking about how every child really has the right to quality educational opportunities, and just trying to beat the drum about how the gap for low-income students is really due not because of the lack of choice, but it's really due to the lack of supports for students, such as quality pre-K after school, the lack of resources focused on low-income students, lack of parental involvement, and inadequately trained teachers, especially in poor school districts. I think we have, though, tried not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and you know, public schools in Arkansas really have been under attack, and so we've really tried to highlight that, hey, we have seen significant improvements in test scores and in public schools since the Supreme Court case back in 2002. Now, we have a lot more room to do better, especially for low-income and minority students, but that doesn't mean that we throw public schools under the bus. I mean, they need to be still need to be the primary vehicle for making change to the system, and but we just need to invest our resources into what the research shows is most effective. You know, we've also, both in terms of our policy priorities and our messaging, have also really talked about the need for spending existing resources better, more effectively, and so there is a pot of categorical funding. Not as big, obviously, has the primary school funding mechanism that schools do receive based on their numbers of low-income students, and it's supposed to be spent on addressing the gap. But the research shows that in Arkansas, schools are not really spending it on that population, and they're not spending it on things that the research shows works. And so we've really tried to hit home on that issue. So in terms of some of the challenges, we have been able to get some limits in terms of how schools spend their poverty dollars, pushing them not to have large unspent balances. I think we're going to see changes this year that'll place limits in terms of how they can spend it so that they spend it the right way. We've gotten several rounds of parental involvement legislation. We've gotten some school discipline legislation. This session, we had to fight off several big budget cuts. One bill, for example, would have transferred over $1 billion over 10 years, which that's a lot for Arkansas, away from education to highway and roads. And so that would have devastated the system, so we had to fight that. Also fought off a lot of bad school choice legislation. In terms of challenges, we really do not have a lot of business support for equity in education. It's really focused much more around choice and testing. We have superintendents who, quite frankly, are really more concerned with flexibility and no new mandates. Now, we think that's changing. We're starting a partnership with them around chronic absenteeism. We do have a fairly limited progressive advocacy infrastructure. And of course, we do have major foundation support in this state and also other states, quite frankly, supporting school choice. And I don't think I need to name that foundation. And even though we agree on some issues, I think we can't deny the fact that they've put millions and millions of dollars into promoting school choice efforts. I think I would just end with a couple of things. In terms of how we've connected our campaign to the national work, both that SHOT is doing and other groups, I think it's really trying to build that local, state, and federal echo chamber for our ideas. And so hopefully we can get the same ideas going across states. And I think also really trying to, both at the federal level but the state level, really trying to have promote and talk about policies that really complement one another. And I think you are seeing some of that now with the President's early learning proposal. And I'll just end with a couple things. I think we have to recognize that some policy changes or some opportunities for improvement are at the state level, but many are at the local level. And so I think you need a campaign that recognizes both. And I think looking for partners where you can, and not insisting on having a partner who will agree with you on every single issue, but that might vary issue by issue. I think also having a campaign where you have local organizers who can work together with state policy advocates, because those groups oftentimes have different skill sets. And so getting partnerships where you have those two groups working together is important. And finally, the last thing where I know we need to do better at is really trying to generate more business support for equity issues. I think that's decreased over the last decade for us. I think we need to find some way to recruit more business support for equity with less of an emphasis on choice and testing and standards. So with that, I'll end.
All right, thanks so much, Rich. Cynthia is going to be speaking next. She is a parent organizer out of New York. I'll let her introduce herself. Cynthia, take it away.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Cynthia Williams, and I am an organizer with the United Parents of Highbridge and the New York City Coalition for Educational Justice. And I became involved with education organizing and advocacy years and years and years ago when I was a part of the PTA in my children's local school. And then I became involved with an initiative in my community around improving the neighborhood called Neighborhood Partners Initiative. And I've been a volunteer for over 25 years, just became an organizer in the last 4 years. Getting paid to organize, I should say. I'm a mom of 6 children, and all of them have gone through New York City public schools. And so the landscape in my state looks like I think it does in many other states across the nation in low-income and high-needs communities. We feel that public education is being hijacked by high-stakes testing, co-locations, closing schools, the charter school movement, and many of the things that David mentioned in his PowerPoint presentation. And we just also feel that our educators are being disrespected, vilified, forced to work in environments that are not conducive to the well-being of them or to our children. And so we've been working on trying to address these issues for years and years. And we also deeply believe that equity is the way forward and that we have to move away from high-stakes testing, that rates, especially in New York City, that rates schools, teachers, and students, by those high-stakes testing. And we just feel that there needs to be other assessments or measures used to determine what a child knows, how a teacher teaches, and that the community should be involved in making those decisions and working on policies, around education reform. So my work in New York City really is tied through the state through an organization called the Alliance for Quality Education. And the Alliance for Quality Education worked very closely with an organization that was called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, where we fought tooth and nail to get equitable funding for students in high-needs, low-income neighborhoods, not just in the city but across the state. We won the lawsuit. It was a lawsuit that was brought to the state and won the lawsuit, but like most Republican, I hate to say that, well, I'll say Republican and Democratic governors refused to give us our money, the money that is needed. But every year we are in Albany fighting for equity, and not only in Albany, we've taken our fight and our argument to Washington, D.C., because we really believe that the policies that are affecting our schools, our states, all of them, it stems from Washington, D.C. And in New York City in particularly, we have been seen as the model, for what goes on throughout the country. And so we feel a definite need to shape what good quality education looks like, what good quality policies look like, and we do that through developing campaigns that are based on research, improvement practices, and that are put on by or put together by the voice of the community and parents through who are part of CEJ. And so recently, what we've been doing, first let me say this is an election year in New York City. Our schools are controlled by our mayor, as they are in many urban cities like Chicago, and we're going to get a new mayor this year. So we felt that it was imperative to begin to develop a campaign around what a quality education would look like, and develop a platform to influence whoever the next mayor is going to be. So we have shared this platform with all of the mayoral candidates who are Democrats in our city, and we created what we call a policy hub, which is an online clearinghouse of sort that has policies, proven practices that they can take from, look at, and develop their education platform based on that. We also face, parent engagement, the lack of it, and parents' voice being shut down, the community voice being shut down in New York City. And so we created like these two coalitions. One is called A+ New York, that works on the policy piece, and one is called New Yorkers for Great Public Schools, which really formed a coalition of unions, of community groups, advocacy partners, so that we could really call out the terrible, for lack of a better word, the terrible policies, education policies that affect all our children, to bring it to the forefront and really just dismantle the myth, or demystify the myth that our mayor has been putting out, that, oh, schools are great, the graduation rate is so high, it's been higher than it's ever been, that he came into office. But the fact of the matter is, it may be a little higher, but kids are graduating not prepared for college. And so we wanted to make sure that that messaging got out, that we was going to every turn come at the mayor with those facts and bring it to the attention of the media and anyone who was willing to listen. So that was New Yorkers for Great Public Schools. And then we formed a coalition called A+ New York. Like our group always do, we might put the issues out there on the table, but we always find solutions. And so A+ New York was formed to bring about the solutions for fixing our schools. And we did what our mayor does not do, and listen to the voice of the parents and the community, and actually put a school bus together. We painted the school bus blue, went around to all of the neighborhoods that we could possibly go to, that we had connections to, and gave community residents the opportunity to come on that bus and look at the different topics that parents and community said they wanted to see happen in schools in the future, and allow them to, disagree or agree. And then at the end of their tour on the bus, they did a survey to say what they thought was missing. It's just something that is never happened in our city. We thought it was such a great idea to do. And at the end of all of this, we are putting together a platform that we hope that on day one of the next mayor term, which would be January 1st, 2014, that he or she is then using that platform to shape this education agenda. So there's a lot that's going on in our city and in our state. And then I'm just going to share a victory with you, because I really want to leave time for people to ask questions. I see the time is running short. And one of the victories that we had with all of the coalition building that we've done, with all of the work that we've done, is put on a mayoral debate. We were the first group that really had an education mayoral debate in the city. This happened about 3 weeks ago, and it happened at New York University. We had all of the Democratic mayoral candidates except for one, and that was, you wouldn't know her, but Christine Quinn, and she opted out at the last minute. But including Weiner, they were all there, and a Republican candidate. And so it was created or convened by our group. It was hosted by one of our parent leaders, Zakia Ansari, and well, she actually moderated, and it was attended by over 1,500 people. And so, you know, we are really working to change the story, to take our schools in a new direction, and working off of the equity, you know, issue. We really believe that it's the way to move forward and away from the high stakes testing, and, you know, about providing the opportunity for our children to learn and to really get a quality and well-rounded education that prepares them for college, for success in college and in their careers. And so I'm going to end with that, and then we'll take, you know, the questions.
Well, Cynthia, thank you very much, and thanks to Jeff and David. David, thanks for the background, and I'm sorry, Rich and Cynthia, thanks to you two for giving us some perspective from sort of on-the-ground state-level campaigns. I think, you know, as you both said, there's a lot of common struggles across many other states, and lots of parents and community members fighting for the same thing. So it's good to hear that there are these very vibrant statewide campaigns that are working to defend their schools. And I hope for everyone listening, you've gotten some ideas on how to frame your own work and your own messages, and to try and focus more on equity and not just in opposition to the testing and the standards. We've got a couple questions coming in. This one is probably for everyone, but probably more for Rich and Cynthia. What have been the most effective sound bites that you've used, whether it's at press conferences, whether it's in press releases? What have you found to be really short, good synopsis of what you stand for?
Okay, I'll go first, and I guess ours is Taking Back Our Schools 2013, or All Children Deserve the Opportunity to Learn. You know, those kinds of things have really grabbed the media's attention, like, you know.
And I would just add to that, it's recognizing the progress that our public schools have made, and we have more work to do, and we need to build on things that we're doing well, or things that the research shows works.
Yep.
And David, how about you? As you've been, you know, giving presentations about the Equity Commission and even your even Education Law Center's school finance work, have you found any good sound bites that have worked for you?
Well, not necessarily a soundbite, but I think we have to reframe the conversation about funding and move it away from talking about dollars to talking about how, particularly the states here, because the states control all of the funding, whether it's generated locally or at the state level, that the states must redesign their financing formulas so that they're connected to, linked to the cost, the actual cost, and they provide the funding necessary for all kids to have the high quality education that they deserve. So this linkage between the standards that the states are imposing upon the district, schools, teachers, and students to the funds that are necessary to achieve them.
And then, David, maybe another question for you coming in. What has been the U.S. Department of Education's reaction to the Equity Commission report?
Well, mostly around preschool, because, you know, our proposal was essentially what, you know, in effect adopted by the President, and now has the centerpiece of the President's preschool proposal. So most of what the Department has focused on in terms of the specifics of the report are around our recommendation that within 10 years, all low-income children and children in high-poverty districts have access to a well-planned, high-quality preschool program, And that's really, and we also called, frankly, for the coordination of federal Head Start, child care, and public school dollars down to the states to direct the states to build these kinds of systems. So the focus is really a bit about preschool, and I actually think that's not a bad place to start, because I do think the one place where there's more of a consensus nationally on what to do in terms of what Rich was talking about, research-based proven programs, is around preschool. I think everybody's beginning to recognize what the report says, which is that we're not going to improve educational outcomes for poor kids, kids of color, English language learners, unless we get them all into high-quality preschool, I would say starting at age 3, but at the very least age 4.
Thanks, David. We've got another question coming in about the report. Does it highlight any concerns regarding immigrants or migrant students?
No, there's not particularly. It does not. It does talk about ELLs. There's a discussion. Not so much about which programs for English language learners are the the better approaches, but more in terms of making sure that all students, including students with special needs, and obviously that would include children of immigrant families that are entitled to go to public education in our states, have the same opportunities that students in more affluent districts have, and that all the kids need. So only in that sense.
All right, thanks, David. Rich, I know Arkansas Advocates has done quite a bit of work around the DREAM Act there in Arkansas, and some economic research about the importance of giving young immigrant students, sort of the same economic and educational opportunities. Do you have anything to add?
Well, we've been very fortunate. One of the partners for the OTL campaign, but also around the Grade Level Reading campaign, the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, did this series of reports earlier this year on immigration, what it means for Arkansas, both in terms of the economy, what it means for local communities, what it means for tax dollars, what it means for business, and it's really research-based with lots of data. And the data in there is just so compelling. I mean, I wish every state had a similar study done for them. And I think if you go to the Rockefeller Foundation's website, I believe it's wrfoundation.org, you can find it on there, and it's just an amazing resource for advocacy work.
Thanks. Cynthia, have you been a part of any of that type of work?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and finish out our presentation here. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I hope you got some takeaways. I think it was great to hear Rich talk about the statewide partnerships that they've done of splitting up the maybe advocacy side and the research side. And it was really great to hear Cynthia talk about the extent to which they really went out and sought the opinion of all the community members, even taking a bus tour around the city. I think these are some great tactics for building connections in communities that help build campaigns, and I hope that the messaging and strategy that we've gone over in this webinar, can provide some framework and some guidance for your work. I would like to point everyone to a piece that we just released this week by the OTL Campaign. We're calling it the Education Declaration to Rebuild America. If you liked what you heard in this webinar, chances are you're going to like what's in the declaration, and you might consider signing on. We talk a lot about the shift from standards-based reform to supports-based reform, and the need for different policy solutions like access to pre-K and fair funding. So I would encourage you all to check it out at otlcampaign.org/education-declaration. We will be following up with you all with an email, including links to some of the resources that were mentioned in the report. If you'd like to continue the conversation, we certainly hope you do. Here are the Twitter handles and website links for all the groups that were involved in this: Arkansas Advocates, the Coalition for Educational Justice, Education Law Center, and our own. So thank you very much for joining us all. We hope you had a good time. Bye.
Did you want us to hang?